The fact of the matter is, we all age, and while certain actors like Paul Rudd have been aging gracefully throughout the decades, time isn't as kind to others, or the production just calls for a ludicrous amount of time to be flashed back, like in Ant-Man and the Wasp, which turned the clock back to the 1980s for the Pym family, to staggering results. The CGI wizardry going into de-aging has been around for over a decade now, and the results have blown our minds, for better and for worse.
Well, there's no coming back from that.
Here's some of its most shocking results. Robert Downey Jr.'s go-around at the de-aging tech took a meta approach in Civil War. Since this technology in the universe was described as a therapeutic experiment, the effect would have been forgiven if it appeared a little dodgy. Alas, that's not the case, and it looks fantastic. Rather than employing Stark-level technology to create the effect, Lola VFX opted in on generating the youthful face on top of Robert's performance. By referencing his earlier films like Less Than Zero, the VFX team scrubbed over 4,000 frames to create the convincing effect. Admittedly, the cameo itself was the most shocking point of this entry, but when this surprise Jedi entered the frame in The Mandalorian Season 2, fans were ecstatic. When Luke Skywalker revealed his face in the season finale, we were shocked at Hamill's post-Return of the Jedi look. The effect was a mixture of stuntman Matt Rigetti performing the role for action scenes, Max Lloyd-Jones as the Luke stand-in, and Mark Hamill on set providing advice and dialogue. This definitely isn't the first time de-aging was done by ILM for the Star Wars franchise, but it did lead to an interesting discourse over whether or not the technology should be used, or if the role should just be recast. The concept of de-aging fits perfectly into Blade Runner's cyberpunk setting. The process of the effect is even foreshadowed early on in Blade Runner 2049, with the face of Joy being superimposed on top of Mariette. A moment that's paid off when the Wallace Corporation reveals their replicant of Rachel. To create the effect, Sean Young was heavily involved in the process. She gave various points of reference, including a 3D scan of her face, which was then used to digitally recreate scenes from the original film, to see if the resemblance was uncanny. When it came time to film, a body double was used, with adjustments being made to the face to superimpose Young. Several specific adjustments were also made to help sell the effect of the body double, with the shoulders being narrowed and even stray hairs being added in to complete the resemblance. Almost everyone loved this one. That is with the exception of Sean Young herself, who called the cameo so full of shit. The first use of the de-aging technology in a blockbuster film was used in 2006's X-Men: The Last Stand, to revert Sir Patrick Stewart and Sir Ian McKellen back 20 years. While this one ended up making Professor Xavier look more like Professor Egg Savior, we have to give credit where credit is due, as this pioneered the techniques to yield much better results in the future. In fact, the people that made this quasi-Jeff Bezos was the same company that did the dang near flawless RDJ1, proving practice makes perfect. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button was a colossal attempt, being the second movie to utilize the technology. Looking at the previous results, a movie surrounding de-aging seemed ludicrous, but the results for this one were tremendous. Benjamin Button used the CGI to effectively tell its story, which garnered award attention, with the film winning the Oscar for Best Visual Effects, among plenty of other awards. With the Fountain of Youth, there would be absolutely no use for digital de-aging. Alas, that's just a fictional concept. When the time came for Johnny Depp to portray a young Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Man Tell No Tales, extensive CGI was required. 15 VFX artists were employed over the course of a year to bring the youthful glow from his crybaby past. The results were, interesting. The series is known for some phenomenal CGI, and while Sparrow's face is a dead ringer for Depp's 21 Jump Street era look, its emotion is just about as dead as Salazar himself. Ang Lee went all out with the gimmicks on Gemini Man, switching up the frame rate from the typical 24 frames per second of film past to 120 FPS, to selling the movie based off of being able to see Will Smith in his prime. Young Will looks spot on, and even more impressive is this is one of the first times that a fully de-aged character has a major role in a motion picture, representing a bright future for the tech. The Terminator franchise has had multiple goes at recreating 80s Arnold Schwarzenegger. In Terminator Salvation, the effect was a little shoddy. Partly because this was done in the early days of de-aging, and partly because Arnie wasn't around at all during the filming process. Terminator Genesis improved greatly on this technique, with VFX company MPC having the challenge of having current Arnie fighting his past self. Then we reach the absolute chef's kiss of de-aging with the opening of Dark Fate. Not only is Arnie perfectly replicated, but also Linda Hamilton and a child Edward Furlong. This one was fantastic and shows extremely promising results for the future. Can you believe how Groot was digitally altered down to baby Groot?
I am Groot.
Okay, that's not what we are here to talk about today. Rather, we need to talk about how perfect young Kurt Russell is in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This one is so impressive that the cast and crew originally lied to the press, stating that there was actually no digital alterations, rather that all the work was done with makeup, which seemed plausible. But as it turns out, it was all digital. Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, and Joe Pesci have had their entire career in the spotlight, making the de-aged scenes in The Irishman all that more challenging in post-production and effective in the final film. Oddly enough, what truly ended up being the hindrance in the de-aging process for the film was De Niro taking on the physicality of a 20-something-year-old. A simple shot of De Niro in his youth getting up from a chair ended up taking several takes, as the then 75-year-old wasn't as spry as he used to be. Contrary to the last point, Samuel L. Jackson's lifelong career in Hollywood actually ended up being the benefit to the VFX artists when it came to de-aging Nick Fury in Captain Marvel. They scanned through frames of his 90s works such as Die Hard with a Vengeance and Star Wars The Phantom Menace to get an accurate representation of the actor's young likeness and mannerisms. Like her brother in The Mandalorian, Princess Leia in Rogue One was certainly a surprise that blew our minds more so at her inclusion rather than the actual effect. As the events of Rogue One directly lead into A New Hope, getting a young Carrie Fisher was essential and a lot more difficult than bringing back a Darth Vader costume. Carrie Fisher had no part in the de-aging, only being around to approve the final cut. While it wasn't as ridiculous as Peter Cushing being digitally brought back to life, it was still pretty wild. Plenty of comedies have used flashbacks with current actors playing their younger selves to drive home the comedy. While this is typically done with a wig and some makeup, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson got the full digital treatment in Central Intelligence. The results blew our minds for the wrong reasons, being genuine nightmare fuel. It's safe to say that most of us are excited to be out of puberty.
Christ, please, just let me do this.
But Warner Brothers desperately needed the kids of Derry to look the same as they did for It Chapter 2. From the get-go, it was in the film's budget to ensure that the flashback scenes looked as accurate to the first film as possible, making this the youngest use of de-aging tech and the first utilization of the technique in the horror genre. But we are glad to report that Pennywise's de-aging at the end of the film is all practical, baby. Paul Reubens may have not physically aged too badly in the years between Pee-wee's Big Top and Big Holiday, but in an effort to make Pee-wee seem ageless, he was digitally touched up to look as close to as he did in 1988. The effect works pretty well since it's so subtle, but Pee-wee has always looked like a ventriloquist doll, so maybe the plastic effect of bad de-aging just makes him look more like himself. While most of the de-aged effects look best when the actors aren't emoting or are in dim lighting, the rapid improvements of deepfake technology is surely going to present some staggering results when utilized in upcoming productions. Hopefully we'll never see another Jeff Bridges or Sylvester Stallone fiasco ever again.